Right. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you guys hear me in the back? Everybody enjoying GrrCON so far? Yes? Good, good. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you taking some time to listen to me today. I know for me personally, around 3:30 in the afternoon, I can't think of a better time that I'd rather take a nap. So I'm going to do my best to keep you guys awake here. I don't know if that's the case for you, but no promises, but I'll do my best. So my name is Justin Beard. I'm a systems administrator, systems engineer actually from CyberArk. Used to be a systems administrator, and not Garrett Lansing, by the way. If it goes badly, just blame Garrett. If it goes well, I'll take the credit. But I'm here to talk to you a little bit about privileged account security and why we think that's so important, and really just how following good security practices around managing your privileged accounts in the enterprise is just key, and how it can prevent the bad guys from sneaking in and making off with your bread and butter. So I've actually noticed lately it seems like more and more people are becoming kind of more familiar with the concepts around privileged account security, so it's kind of less of an uphill battle explaining what that is. I'm sure many of you in this room are already familiar with the problems and challenges that we're addressing and why that is so important. But today I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes, and I've got someone in here to keep me honest. We'll keep it down to 25 minutes about what we at CyberArk think privileged account security is and how we approach it. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand and stop me at any point, and I'll try to stop if I see your hands. So, preventing the theft of highly privileged credentials we found is really key to short-circuiting the majority of today's sophisticated cyber attacks. And the rise of these advanced persistent threats is really prompting a lot of organizations to really focus in and think about privileged access controls. And quick, before I kind of launch into my talk here, a little background on CyberArk. We are first and foremost a security company. We're also the only security company that's entirely focused on eliminating the most advanced cyber threats, and those are the threats that are using insider privileges to attack the heart of the enterprise. So we've led the market now in proactively stopping these types of attacks for almost 2 decades now. We've been around since 1999, and around 3,000 of the world's leading companies trust us to protect them in this area. So to kind of position the problem for you, privileged credentials are everywhere. Every organization has systems, right? Platforms, appliances. Every technology has some way built into it for somebody to log in and maintain it, support it, modify it. Every technology has that. So the accounts that have the power to make these changes are, of course, the privileged accounts with which we're concerned. In the wrong hands, these are the accounts that have the power to cause great harm to any organization. So where are your privileged accounts? I'm sure you can think of some obvious examples, but they're everywhere, right? They're in every piece of hardware, every piece of software. I saw a guy demonstrating, the ability to hack I think it was a 2012 Ford Focus out there. I mean, they're just everywhere. So, they exist across the entire IT stack. I mean, we're talking databases, applications, endpoints, network devices. A privileged user, the way we define that, a privileged user is any user that has the capability to change, alter, or impact the operational service of a business process. So, in any organization, this includes not only system administrators, but also maybe some less obvious examples, things that you may not consider privileged accounts, like some of your business users, some of your more powerful business users, some of your developers, of course, and maybe even social networking account managers, for example. So once you really take the time to kind of carefully consider what might fit that definition of a privileged account in your organization, typically that number ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 times, believe it or not, 3 to 4 times the number of employees in the typical organization. And again, just think about it. How many desktops are there? How many servers? How many databases? Network devices? Other infrastructure components. There's a lot out there. The 30-day cybersecurity sprint memo that was released after the OPM breach. This is kind of just some highlights from that memo. It could almost just be a summary of the whole thing, right? There's a lot of words in that thing. I read a little bit more of it, and there was just kind of a lot of similar language. But those are some highlights there for you. And that's available on whitehouse.gov if you want to look it up for yourself. But this was developed, of course, in response to that OPM breach, and you'll notice the focus on privileged users, on privileged functions, privileged accounts, privileged user activities. There's a lot of language around privilege. So just kind of highlighting the importance that played in that breach. And the officials that are responsible here do recognize the key role of privilege in that breach, and they recognize that protecting those privileged accounts is the key to preventing future breaches. So the reason that so many attackers are consistently successful in not only breaching the perimeter, at least 90% of organizations have been breached at least once. That's an old number. I'm sure it's more by now. But they also persist and they move laterally through the environment, and they use privileged credentials to get it done. And it's more specifically your privileged credentials that they're using once they've breached your perimeter and they're in your environment. So more specific, the reason that they, or when they use your credentials, rather, I should say, they look like you to your defense systems. So that's the challenge. I recently dusted the cobwebs off Blade Runner and watched that. It actually struck me that this year, 2016, was the year that the Nexus 6 replicants were produced in the 4 Blade Runner universe. And it struck me that the number one thing that made the replicants so dangerous, even though they had superior strength, superior intelligence, that wasn't the number one thing that made them so dangerous. The number one thing was that they looked like us. They looked like the humans. So, enter Rick Deckard here. Only the most discerning experts could tell them apart from the real humans. So that's the same advantage that attackers have against your enterprise when they break in and they steal your credentials. Is, they look just like you for all intents and purposes. I know we have some capture the flag events going on here. One thing that commonly happens, I haven't seen whether they've actually done this at this particular hacking conference yet, but one thing they'll sometimes do is pass around credentials, right, to the various vendor booths as kind of an incentive to get people to stop by the booth. And that's because to be successful in capture the flag, to be able to breach or hack something, having those credentials is key. So it's been well documented actually that privileged accounts are required to carry out a breach, and just put yourself in the hacker's shoes. Many of you here don't really have to. That's not much of an effort for you, right? You're already there. Need access to a particular network segment, or do you want to change firewall rules to enable external communication if you're doing data exfil? Do you want to gain access to a domain controller? Do you want to dump a database table to capture maybe a competitor's customer list? Unprotected, unmonitored privileged accounts are going to be the key for you. So the quote here on the slide from Mandiant says that 100% of the breaches that they investigated involve stolen credentials. So what we've found in the breaches that we've analyzed is that whenever possible, the attacker does go after those privileged credentials because those are the keys that provide the access that they need and gives them that control over the IT infrastructure. So we've kind of made the case for privileged accounts needing to be protected. It's a very critical challenge that we need to solve if we want to create measurable security and prevent an advanced persistent threat from gaining a foothold. So the diagram that you're looking at here is the life cycle of a typical breach. And this isn't just something we threw together. This concept was originally based on investigation by Lockheed Martin after the massive cyber attack that they suffered, and it's been refined by other organizations, including ourselves and our security partners, just based on studies of numerous breaches. So escalation of privilege, as you can see, is always critical in this attack chain in order for it to be successful. So this occurs not only toward the beginning, soon after where the breach first occurs, but it also typically repeats over and over again as part of that loop that's in the middle. And that's happening as attackers move laterally through the organization after they've managed to do that initial breach of the perimeter. And that's when they gain control over, endpoints, usually escalating to servers, and ultimately, typically, they're escalating to domain controllers. That's very often what they're after. So this is a process that, according to firms that investigate breaches, such as FireEye and Mandiant, as I mentioned a minute ago, it takes over 200 days on average. So 200 days over 6 months where an attacker is just sitting in your environment and they're doing nothing but moving laterally, grabbing hashes of credentials and trying to escalate their privilege, moving to different systems within the organization, just looking for ways to escalate their privilege over 6 months. So how do we solve this problem? How do we address this? So at CyberArk, privileged account security, as I mentioned, is really just all we do for a living. That's it. So our mission is threefold. First part of the mission, control. We want to provide solutions that give you full control over your privileged accounts. So you decide exactly who gets access to privileged accounts and when they get access, what type of access they get. Also, you don't have to show them the password to every account that they have access to. So do you allow the user to view the password, or do they just click a button, once they've authenticated to the solution? Do they just click a button to get an instant connection to a target with those credentials being programmatically entered for them? It actually makes it easier for them, but more secure at the same time. Do you change passwords after each use? Maybe they do need to see the password, but maybe you want to give them a password that's going to be useless an hour later, so they don't keep it on a sticky note stuck to their monitor. And finally, you can enforce manager approval. You could have even multiple levels, multiple tiers of approval if you want to. We basically put the control back in your hands where it belongs. The next part of the mission is visibility. So we want to provide your organization with full visibility. In an ideal world, we have a report that tells us everything everyone did with every privileged account in the organization. CyberArk has the tools to provide that ideal scenario. And, can we just agree? I mean, the number one thing that an attacker wants is a privileged account. A CISO, actually from a large organization that I spoke to, he just told me, if I just had a list, if I had a list of every powerful or privileged account throughout my organization, I would sleep better at night. I would know that our security posture was increased and improved just from having a list of all those privileged accounts that exist in my organization, because he didn't even know how many were out there. And of course that's something we can do, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then, excuse me just for a minute. Last but not least is detection. So let's make sure that the account is being used for its intended purpose. Let's alert the responsible parties when we detect possible misuse. And beyond detection, let's actually set up proactive protection and automatic mitigation when a potential threat is detected. For an example, if an attacker initiates an overpass the hash attack, that's something that we can detect going on. Our privileged threat analytics actually has network sensors that do deep packet inspection. They can detect that the attack is happening, and then we can send a message over to the vault and say, hey, we detected that this account has been compromised, it's being used in an overpass the hash attack. Change the credential, and that ends the attack right there. So this is what the attack cycle looks like with CyberArk in the picture. By implementing CyberArk, organizations everywhere are breaking the attack chain here at the critical point of privilege escalation, rendering these advanced threats basically null and void at that point. I mean, there's a reason that CyberArk's usually the #1 or #2 call after a major security incident. The more power that an attacker has, the more damage that he or she can create. And that's why, again, the first thing an attacker wants to execute an attack is a privileged account. So we do have some recommendations. We're not just here to scare you today. These are our primary recommendations to mitigate some threats. So we want to assign a unique password on every endpoint for built-ins. Establish credential boundaries on the domain, following Microsoft best practices, Tier 0, Tier 1, Tier 2. One-time passwords, again, the passwords that rotate every time they're used. Isolate your high-value assets. We're talking about domain controllers, anything that's subject to any specific compliance standards like PCI, SOX, or HIPAA, and really anything in your environment that's being accessed by a less trusted third party like a contractor or a vendor. And finally, monitor the behavior that's going on. Look for changes in behavior for common privileged accounts and sensitive assets, especially indicators of credential theft, which we're able to, again, not only detect but mitigate, and enable your reactive countermeasures is kind of what I just described with automatic response to attacks. So just as privileged accounts are the keys to controlling an enterprise, at CyberArk we do provide the keys to securing them. So we have the most mature, most comprehensive set of tools available in the privileged account security space today. So now there's a lot here. We don't expect organizations to boil the ocean and do everything at once, but we do encourage a phased approach. So I won't go individually through each aspect of the solution, but it's there at the bottom for you to see. The main reason I just want to show you this is because of an important consideration. When you're considering a solution for privileged account security, again, you don't want to do everything on day one, and you may want to vault your passwords. You may want to do session monitoring today. Maybe removing hard-coded passwords from applications is not part of your list of use cases today, but it could be down the road. So we think that it makes sense to start with a solution that has all the capabilities, not just that you need now, but that you may need in the future, so you're not piecing together a solution from multiple vendors later on. So just some takeaways I want to leave you with. What do you actually need to do now? Step one is identify. You can schedule an hour with me. Actually, we have a free tool, and I can run through that with you. I do it all the time. And it's called Discovery and Audit, or DNA for short. So we do a DNA scan. We can identify just all those critical account details. Where do they live? Which ones are out of compliance? Where are their vulnerabilities? And things that we need to address. Step two is change. So identify the critical platforms, find the low-hanging fruit and the quick wins, and start getting those sensitive passwords changed to unique, complex, and random values that are not, an administrator going through and giving all your root accounts the same password, and do that with the Enterprise Password Vault. Step three is isolate. Nail down your domain controllers and any other juicy targets, your crown jewels, if you will. Determine which systems are in scope for those audit requirements I mentioned, things like PCI or SOX or HIPAA and so forth. And then determine which systems are going to be accessed by those less trusted third parties. Anything that falls into at least one of those three categories really should be isolated behind a secure jump server that records all the sessions that take place on any of these targets. So focus on nailing down those three areas, and you can really just breathe easier, knowing that your security posture has been dramatically and drastically improved. Any questions? All right. Thanks, everyone.